Has children, has no children, marked, no inferiors, no select, and unmarked.
Yeah.
I decided to leave all and flags in.
Yeah, all right. You said the end down using that.
Alexis here, and according to the clock, it is time, everybody. Welcome to IMAP for Rev 3. This is the crowd we had earlier this morning, the extra. So I'm going to hand straight over to Neil since they're his slides. The blue sheets are making their way around the room somewhere, and everything else is there.
Okay, hi everyone. Let's get started. So, Ron, surely you should be noting the note well.
Yeah. Note the note well.
It has been noted. Good.
Excellent.
Okay, quick overview of the agenda. I'm just going to go briefly over the major changes since IETF 100 in Singapore. Been a lot of small little editorial fixes and stuff. Obviously, you can go see full Git repository and log of changes if you would like, or compare the different versions. Then we'll have a quick look at remaining issues. There'll be some discussion of a few extensions, new drafts that have been proposed. Bron might talk a bit about Test Suite. I'm not actually sure how much that's going to happen.
We'll see if I get there.
And we'll see if there's any other business. Probably we're actually not going to need as much time as is on here. I think this is going to be shorter than we originally thought. So, big changes since before. One was just the big rename. This was where we renamed all the methods names and simplified things. So the response names now match the request names. And you don't need to pluralize anything. Everything's singular, and you don't need to conjugate anything. So it makes it much easier, especially if you're not a native English speaker, to add new methods and not get confused with what's going on. And we also renamed message object, which represents the RFC 5322 message in JSON, to email, because each object in JMAP has its own ID, and it was confusing a lot of people the difference between the JMAP email ID, as it's now called, and the RFC 5322 message ID. So they now have different names, and hopefully that will make it slightly less confusing. So quick example, you can see, hang on, I can do this, I think. Yeah, so request and response. Request name is now the same as the response name. Email get, we're getting email objects now, then verb. So getting some IDs, and we're only fetching the third ID property, and then we're getting back the data that we requested. So that's that. Sort collation algorithms. This is simply the sorting on queries is you can now specify which collation algorithm to use, and the server can advertise which ones it supports. And we're using the identifiers from the IANA registry established in 4790. And if you don't specify one, you get a default, and the default is we don't mandate a default, but we recommend it be case insensitive and Unicode aware. And there's two options that we suggest that both fulfill those requirements, one of which is the Unicode collation algorithm. Can't remember which one. Anyway, see the spec. So again, an example of this, the sort property, which is an array of properties to sort by. If two things have the same, you move on to the next property, but we've only got one here. Instead of having weird string interpolation, is now an array of objects, which is easier to process. So we're sorting by the subject property. We're sorting in a descending order because its ascending is false. And here we're using the Unicode case map collation, which presuming the server supports that should all be good. That's what it will sort them by, and you'll get your results back.
Alexei, can you remind me, there is a way of advertising this in capabilities, right?
Correct, yes. Right. Capabilities give which collation algorithms the server supports, yeah. And then, yes, by far the biggest change is the new email object. As I said, that represents the message in JSON. This is way more powerful than it was before. It can give you the full MIME structure now, whereas before you had a really simplified version. but we've and you can access arbitrary headers in much more powerful ways than before. But we've also kept a lot of the simpler ways of accessing the same data so that clients can kind of scale their needs. Simple clients are not going to be overwhelmed by huge amounts of complexity, but as you get more advanced, the power is there without the clients having to resort to passing the full MIME structure themselves from the raw message, which also means they can be much more efficient in terms of the data transmitted over the wire, because you can request just what you want, including now you can request a maximum size for a body value. So this was I think the last place where you could get flooded with data when like your client might request 10 messages, but it turns out one of those messages has a 50 megabyte text part. You'd get that full text bar part. Well, now you can say, I want to limit that to a maximum of 100 kilobytes, for example, and the server will truncate that value when it returns it and lets you know that it's been truncated, so that, again, you can't get flooded with data, you have more control, and you can obviously fetch the full thing if you want to afterwards.
Would you like comments as we go?
Sure.
I should send you more detailed comments. One thing, which is a nit really, but I think you took out UTF-8 reference as normative. And that sounds like a mistake.
That would be a mistake. All the data being transferred is UTF-8 unless it's a binary blob, in which case it's obviously
right.
just don't touch it.
Especially it's important because you make a requirement that you cannot truncate
inside a code point.
Inside the character. Unicode UTF-8 sequence, which is, for that you need to understand what UTF-8 sequence is. So
yes.
Anyway.
Okay.
So I'll send it to you now, but
thanks. So I think I've got it. Oh no, I don't actually have an example for that. So that's hopefully that's fine. The only other thing I think really to mention about it is so you can request that the server give you a list of parts that you would display as an HTML body or as a text body. And that is now a list instead of a single value, which lets it more easily handle when you have something like a mailing list that adds its own signature as a separate MIME part afterwards.
Yeah, I think I had a note about this, which I haven't sent yet. When you select text plain, you can still return images. Yes. I found this to be weird.
I mean, actually, you can still return HTML. It's prefer text. If there's a text in HTML.
No, but you can request text plain. Well, there is a shortcut for it.
There's a text body property, which is an array of body parts,
and within them you can have images.
Yes, you can.
Which is it what people want? Or?
Well, so this is the question of what I think so. Yes, well, at least it fits the purpose of this.
So is it this trying to do what iOS does, which is when it generates message, it sort of have text plain parts interspersed with images, and this is the way of retrieving this.
It's not that you generate that, but yes, iOS and Apple Mac Mail in particular likes to send messages like that. So how are you going to represent that, basically, is the question. You could just treat all of those images as attachments and drop the fact that they're meant to be in line, but that loses some of the information that's there. Obviously, you could try and convert the whole thing to HTML, but that's way more complicated. Generally, it's quite easy for a client to just take a list of parts, render each part separately, and just concatenate it all together. And so that's why I'm thinking is that you return this list of...
I was thinking whether there is a use case for a client that doesn't care about images, period.
Well, if it doesn't care, it can just skip.
But
you're not fetching the image data. You're only fetching a small object that lets you know there's a body part with image data. You can, when rendering it, you could easily skip those parts, right?
No, but this is a convenient shortcut to just retrieve all text plain data to display. I'm just thinking about something like links, sort of text-based.
That would be fine. So links would request text body, which would give it the list of parts, but not including the data for those parts. So it would just the email body part is just like the MIME metadata,
Right.
There's a text plain component. This is how many bytes it has. This is
Okay.
and then
You just request specific ones.
yes,
Okay.
and so you would not be fetching that image data at all with that. You'd have a few extra objects that you just ignored, but they're pretty small.
Okay.
Okay, so there aren't too many remaining issues. So let's start with core. And I think this one actually may have been resolved, or at least we've got a good idea. Capability identifier. So each spec, including core and mail and any future ones, and including any vendor extensions which aren't going to be standardized, need an identifier. This is used in the capabilities object, so the server can advertise, I support this capability. The client uses this identifier when it sends an API request to say, I want to use this capability. You have to opt in to use any of the capabilities. So it needs to be unique, preferably short. And I think it would be quite nice if it, maybe this is just a recommendation, that if it's something that can help you find documentation about what this capability is. And I'm thinking here, just if you're a developer and you talk to a new server and you see it has some capability you don't recognize, if that identifier in some way helps you find the information about that, that would be good. So here's a few examples. Now, this is what we actually now currently have in the spec, which is what Chris Newman suggested. So this is for core as an example, JMAP core. Another option is we use like whatever RFC is issued, RFC and number as the identifier, because again, that it's easy to Google and you'll find the spec. Although JMAP core, you'd probably find the spec as well. There's various options here. I think we definitely want to recommend for vendor extensions, it's a URI at a domain that you are in control of. And we would recommend that you help make that URI point to documentation. If someone was to dereference it, presumably it's a URL. But for standard ones, we probably want something shorter. So any particular opinions on this from people?
I mean, URN is compelling because it's still URI. So, but I understand it can get verbose. I mean,
yeah, I was hoping you could do something that was like just URN IETF JMAP or something, but apparently not. You need extra bits in there. Chris looked this up, I think.
Well, certain URN designated expert is sitting in the room. Barry's.
If you're talking about doing it in the IETF, that's I have nothing to do with that.
No, but we can do URN.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the IETF namespace is URN IETF params JMAP.
Right.
That's what it would be.
And there's no reason not to use that. So I would urge you not to get a URN JMAP for this.
Mm-hmm. So
right, because the second level is organizations.
Right.
Yeah. So, but that could get pretty long. I don't know. In some ways, I quite like having something that said that has the name of the standard in it. Presuming it's a standard one, as again to help people find it. But
the problem with putting the name of the standard is you often revise the standard without breaking changes to the protocol.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fair point.
And so then it gets confusing.
Yeah. 822 and all the successors. That's a good point.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you should either go with the first option or the last.
Okay.
And
Fine.
the only thing you have in those dots there is params.
It's just literally the string params.
Yes. So it doesn't make it, I mean, it's not as short as JMAP core, but it's not that long. And we're not talking about something like CoAP where you want to save every bit.
No.
So.
Interestingly, a Google search and a DuckDuckGo search for JMAP-core both return a Stack Overflow page about Java G-core dumping as the first response. Over time, that would be more likely to get poisoned than URN IETF something.
It's true. That would probably be more unique. All right. Looks like that seems to be what lean towards Chris.
Right.
Okay, I'll URI only. So then the next question is, do we want to have an IANA registry for these anyway? Yeah, we don't have to. If we do strictly URIs, we don't have to have an IANA registry for these.
You
but
have to have them if you want people to be able to know which ones are in use.
exactly.
So it may be that
Without going to the params registry.
Right,
A registry which polluted with all kind of stuff.
it may be that you don't care because somebody who is going to implement a particular extension already knows where to find the RFCs, and then the RFC tells them the URN. So then but I don't know. I'm of a mixed mind on that.
I prefer registry.
Yeah, I'd rather have a registry.
Okay,
Right.
so I wrote the text for the registry, so that's in there. So we'll
It
just
also
leave
makes it
I'll
easier-
just change the syntax.
Okay. It also makes it easier for future extension writers not to have to know the names of all the other extensions to avoid collisions. They can go look in the registry. So.
All right, sounds good. I think we have resolution on that.
So just for the notes, the conclusion is we're using the URN format and a registry, yes?
Correct.
Excellent.
URN for the standard ones, URI for others.
Yes, they're all URIs. It's a URN in the IETF namespace for the standardized
Oh,
ones.
by the way, I forgot to say I'm Chris Newman for the record.
And I'm Barry Leba.
Great.
And that's most of the population of the room.
No, it's
That's the population of the room.
Okay, cool. Okay, a little bit about proxying. So JMAP is generally very nice for proxying. You can stick a server kind of terminating server and then send some of the method calls out to some backend servers, some to another. Particularly maybe if they're from different accounts and the accounts are separate kind of isolation units, and so they might be on entirely different servers. And so you having this proxy in front is a nice way if the client just connects to one thing. Generally, JMAP's very easy to proxy, and the proxy can be quite simple. It doesn't have to understand much at all about the structure of what it's being sent. It doesn't have to know every method in detail. It can just know the general format of a JMAP API request, look at maybe things like just a method name and one of the arguments, and then dispatch where it needs to dispatch. The main issue with proxying at the moment, which we've run across because we're building this at the moment for part of the fast implementation of JMAP, is creation IDs. So creation IDs are when you create a new object, you use a creation ID, and then the server will give you back what the real ID is. And you can, in the same API request, reference that creation ID from earlier to reference that newly created object so that you can save a round trip for various operations. So this gives you some nice performance wins. But for a proxy, it would have to resolve those if it's doing some of the requests to one point and then another bit later to another endpoint, because the second endpoint wouldn't know about the first thing that's being created. So just to give a quick example here. So here we are creating a draft message. We're doing email/set create. This is the creation ID. This is arbitrary string from the client. And then here we're sending that draft. And we're doing this actually in a single API request. And so sending is creating an email submission object. And you can see here we are referencing that email object, email ID, with its creation ID. So this needs to be able to resolve that to whatever ID was created by the server when it gets to that point. So that's the issue. So one possible solution, which I think is quite simple but also quite neat, is we now have this top level object that for our API request, because we pass the capabilities that we're using as well as the list of method calls. And I think if you could optionally pass a existing hash of created IDs, a mapping of what creation ID you had and what server the ID the server created, then you can just basically pass that around to each place you proxy to. And when you pass it, if you pass one in, you get one pass back out. If you don't pass it in, it doesn't bother passing you one back out again. And then when it gets passed back out in the response, you get any additional ones that's been created. So you can then just pass that object along to each place that you proxy to. Does that make sense to people? Do people think that's a good idea? Any other comments on this? Is this something that belongs in the standard? Was my explanation really confusing? That's another valid option.
Alexi here. So basically, you want to make the proxy as dumb as possible. Is the intent?
Yes, you don't want the proxy to have to understand, because the trouble with the creation IDs is it has to know, it would then have to know, if I go back a slide. So this is a string, and to know that it has to know that that is an ID in order to be able to know, actually, I need to check if I should replace that string with the ID. It has to know the structure of this API call. That's the issue for the proxy. So yeah, it makes it much harder because it has to understand exactly what the structure of every API call it's proxying is in order to know which properties and deeply nested bits are IDs, which it might have to then replace with the real ID from an earlier call.
Okay. Do you have any other proposals, or is this?
I don't, but I'm open to any other proposals.
Okay.
This is just an issue that we have.
I'm just being lazy, and that's the first time I've heard about it. So, okay, I think I need to think about this.
Yeah, that's fine.
In general, I'm a big proponent of implementation considerations and things to do, but in this particular case, you actually have an extra syntactic element, so probably doing it up front would be much easier than retrofitting or explaining to people how to do it after the fact. So actually, it's sort of compelling, but I think I would like to think if there are better ways of doing this.
We did try and think of a few ways of doing them, but this ended up being the simplest because most of the others required something to be able to something to resolve this deeply, and it got a lot more complicated. Yeah, this way only the kind of end server, which is really dealing with the request, needs to fully understand the structure of that request rather than anything in between, which is quite nice.
Can you remind me, are IDs once selected, does server replace them, or are they sort of?
Sorry, the IDs for an object are immutable once it's been assigned. So when you create it,
right?
If that's what you mean.
The one that's specified by the client can it be changed by the server?
Oh yes, clients don't specify IDs. That's why I'm calling this the creation ID. It's saying create me this email object, and just so I know what it is.
It's just an ID to help.
It's just for the request, so that when it comes back
to that one request, after that request is finished, that
exactly
ID has no value anymore.
Yeah, it is. It's just so that when it comes back from the client, the client knows can correlate which ID has been assigned to which object it sent. So, yeah.
Robert Stepanek. So, was there also the thought about enabling proxies to parallelize requests? Because then with the suggested solution, they still would be forced to go one after the other to collect the creation IDs, one method after the other.
If there's a dependency, you can't parallelize. But
what I'm saying is the proxy would, sorry to interrupt, but the proxy, again, wouldn't know if there is a dependency or not, because without knowing about these.
Well, the simplest parallelization, which would give you by far the most win, is to simply only parallelize if you only have /get calls, because those must be immutable on the data. You can't modify the data. So then you're safe to parallelize them and put the results back in the end. Well, actually, that's not entirely true. That's safe as long as you don't have a concurrent process that's writing stuff, I guess. So it's safe if you can get some kind of read lock.
So the interesting question that Robert raised there is, would there be an alternative representation that would allow the proxy to know what it could parallelize more easily than this one? And that's whether you could express upfront which keys you were using in each method call.
Yeah, that was another suggestion that Rob had, different Rob, that the client have to declare up front all the creation IDs it's going to back reference. As a client author hat on, that would be really tricky for our particular implementation anyway, where all this stuff gets handled by magic somewhere further down. This solution was a lot easier.
Yeah,
but
it forces you to work in a certain way, which makes it more.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll maybe send that to the list as well and see if we have more feedback on it. But I think this is a reasonably neat solution. The main other point to make about this, though, is at the moment, creation IDs are scoped by type. We could still have that, but that would mean passing in a separate map for every single type that might have been so far. So I'd probably change that to be creation IDs are just scoped to the request in general. So it's up to the client not to reuse the same key for two different types within the same request, which shouldn't be too hard for it to do. Okay. All right, this was raised on the list last week or so. It's kind of a small thing, but we might as well just see if there's any opinions while we're here. When you do a query on like a set of email, you can either just give it an index, say I want the 10 messages starting index 9 or something weird, or you can give it a anchor, an ID that's going to be in the list and say whatever position that's at, treat that as my position. So they also give an offset from that. So the question is, which direction does the offset go? So if I have this anchor message 123 and anchor offset 1, does that mean my results should start at the first ID after message 123, or does it mean that message 123 should be at position 1 in my results, which would mean the results start the one before because we index from 0? Which of those?
If we look at the, sorry, I should have actually brought up the spec to look at what if you're using rather than using the anchor, you're using the position. The key is called position, isn't it?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. And so if you have an anchor and then you have a position relative to the anchor is virtually considered to be at 0 if you have no anchor, and your position is from that. Could you have anchor and then position and have the list start at the anchor rather than start at 0? So your position, your final start becomes the sum of position and the anchor's location in the list.
So that would be, in this case, presuming you call that position then instead of anchor offset. So it would be the next element after the anchor. Yeah, that would work, actually.
Yeah.
And yeah. Yeah. That's perhaps, yeah, and it removes one of the arguments and also removes the, well, more point, it removes the thing of what happens if you have both position and anchor, which at the moment is kind of an error, but
and then you cap them at the both ends.
yeah, that's already in there and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds like a reasonable solution, which I think actually means we're flipping the meaning if you consider it to what's currently there, but that's fine. I don't really care which way it goes, just what is there? All right, is that minuted in some way? Great, thanks. Okay, this came up in extra. I'll just talk about it here too, although again, I think we came to a resolution in extra, which is what characters should be allowed in IDs. They're always set by the server, but there's currently no restriction in the spec on what characters the server can set, just that it can't set more than 256 bytes for an ID. So the question, should this be restricted? And I think the conclusion in extra was, yes, it should, and we should use the character set for base 64 URL safe, which is A to Z, capital and lowercase, 0 to 9, and also hyphen and underscore. And that gives you 64 code points. It's something that's safe without escaping in URLs with JSON pointer syntax pretty much everywhere. So if your client forgets to escape it, they're not going to have any issues, which is nice because they will. Does anyone have any objection to us just adopting that as the restriction? Good. I think we'll just go with that from extra then. Great. Okay, so that's pretty much all for core. Core is basically done at this point. So I'll reiterate this later, but yeah, if you're planning to review it.
I want to come back to one last question with the ID thing, and I'll double check this
Okay.
and get back to you on it, which is whether an IMAP atom is allowed to start or end with an underscore or a hyphen. I'm not
Okay,
sure of
yep.
the answer to that.
Good point.
So I will follow up on that.
All right.
Good point. I think it probably does.
It can start with that, or
Probably it is allowed. They're not special. Maybe underscore, no dash. Not special in IMAX.
that would be good because obviously, simplifies things. We don't have to add extra restrictions.
Cool.
Okay. Good.
But if they are, that's actually, bringing back to us as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
sure.
We should be consistent between them. Okay, so mail remaining issues. So this kind of feeds into what you were saying earlier, Alexi. On the main list, Neil Chaveri actually brought up the idea of should it not only be allowed to include image parts, but also video and audio parts. So if you had someone that had interspersed these in a MIME structure, should they be returned as these inline parts rather than as attachments? There was someone commented, I think recently, that they thought Outlook will display these inline rather than just as attachments. And Apple Mail, I'm sure, will as well because that supports it. I don't know if anything else does.
Alexi, yeah, I think it is a good point. We probably need to allow at least video, and then might as well
Might as well
audio.
audio as well then, yeah.
Then there is also fonts. There is a top-level font media type.
Is there?
Yes,
know that.
we had a working group for this. I did too. I'm up for F2.
That, to me, makes no sense as a
Well,
inline component.
I know, but it's something that is syntactically allowed. So just
Sure, but I think
actually fonts. Well, if it's HTML referencing a font, then you might want it, but not in text.
But that's
Text.
that's not the point of this. These are meant to be parts that you display visually.
Yeah, fonts affect your display.
Yes,
on
but
the
their,
web.
their reference, that would be something you'd SID reference from an HTML part, right?
Mm.
There's no you
I
wouldn't
suppose-
interpret that as if a font is inline, everything after that I render with that font. That's not what the MIME
You
structure
put a
means.
slash in front of it and put the font again to close.
No, I
No.
suppose no. I was just sort of more thinking of multi-part related, maybe. So,
Yeah, no,
I don't know.
that's fine because those parts will end up in the attached files array and they can be referenced from there by the HTML part.
That's fair enough.
So
I was really trying to get out of my way to invent a use case for this. So,
Yeah.
I think that's fair.
yeah, okay. I think I kind of agree. I don't see any reason not to allow video and audio in there. A client can again easily just not render them in line and treat them as attachments still, but they're easy enough to also just render as you go down. So
And Ned is dubious. Anyone, it scrolled on me, sorry. Ned is dubious. Anyone actually uses inline font objects and expects them to work.
inline font objects, yes, I'm pretty dubious about that too. I think that's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, image, audio, and video is kind of reasonable. So okay, I think if no one has strong objections, I'll change the spec to allow those. Cool. All right. So with the big rework of the email object, there's a lot more power, and the headers stuff, there's still some really nice sugar so that the headers is no more complicated than it was before if you don't need any of the extra power. So you can just ask for a from property and you'll get an array of objects that have email and name properties, and you don't have to care exactly how it's specified underneath, even though it's now all much more strictly specified, and there's actually, you can reuse that stuff against other headers. But for the body part, it is now more complicated, even in the simplest case, than it was before. You can get that array of parts, and you can get the values for the text bits of those parts in a body's values property, which is on the object. But it's not super complicated, but if you're just building a simple client to display a message and you look at this for the first time, it's a little bit overwhelming perhaps. So the question is there value in having an even simpler property, which you could request from the server? Obviously, if you don't request it, you don't get it. And the thinking is it's always HTML, so if there's only text, it converts. If there's any SIDREFs, the server would find the attachments and actually base 64 and inline it. If there's multiple parts, like because it's an array of parts potentially, it would concatenate those together. So what you end up with is a single string that you can pass to a web view and go display this, and that is your message body. Is that worth having, or is it enough complexity on the server and actually no use cases on the client? Well, I don't know. Thoughts?
In ISOD webmail server, this is what we did internally. As in, we have
including the base 64ing of my parts.
Well, this is sort of a detail, but
yeah, sure.
we basically have a set of renderer classes that transfer non-HTML body parts to HTML on the server, and they just return HTML and the
you can
client
concatenate
side
multiple bits together if you have like a
potentially,
segment.
potentially.
Yeah, I mean, we have something reasonably similar at the moment to FastMail. We actually wouldn't be using it in the future with our JMAP implementation, probably use the richer formats, but...
So I suppose what I'm saying is if you have something like this, I would not object because we're doing it. But if you don't have it, I can probably live without it. Anyway, it sort of depends,
It's quite a bit of extra complexity for the server, kind of. Well, it's not too bad, but it doesn't, at the moment, like JMAP doesn't require the server to be able to resolve SIDREFs or to convert text to HTML. I don't know.
A proposal here is that this would be a really good thing for an extension, because if the server advertises it supports it, then you can
actually that might be, yes.
Potentially, yeah. I guess the main thing that concerns me, I guess, is who is this targeted at, this use case? I'm always wary of building something that we don't actually have a defined use for. We just think someone might want.
It's targeted at simple clients that don't want to.
Yes. Does this mythical simple client actually exist, though, or is that more simple than any client?
There are a lot of web applications that want to have a little mailbox view of an application-specific mailbox in the corner, and they want to have as little code for that as possible. And I think our classic, this group is really biased towards, our classic view of mail as this rich environment where we're processing hundreds of mail. But I think if we really want JMAP to succeed, we should chase some of the use cases that IMAP serves really badly, but are really common out in the wild. And so that's why I'm describing that one as something we should consider if we want that.
The main trouble with that, I would say, is at the moment is you still can't just stick this HTML into another web application for security reasons. This is not sanitized, no one's stripped script tags or, well, there's way more sanitization.
So the question then is we might want to do an extension that does this with sanitization.
Yeah, and then you're getting seriously complicated, the amount of processing that has to happen before you can, this plus sanitization is a big...
Okay, I'm leaning towards an extension for this then.
So yeah, I mean, that's a good point, because if you do have something like this, people will probably just stick it in their web page going, oh great, it's just what I need to render. I'll stick it in, and then security hole. I don't know.
But you can, you can also add CSP to it potentially. Well, depends where the complexity is. If the complexity of referencing external resources, then CSP can help.
CSP combined with in an iframe would probably work. That's true without sanitization if you have enough restrictions on the CSP.
So yeah, modest proposal. How about we'll make it an extension, and if later on, once we are nearly done, we can see if we can fold it. If we want to fold it in back to the main spec, we just keep it as an extension.
Okay. And what's people's opinion on should sanitizing be part of that?
Well, you don't need it if you don't, right? I mean, it depends what you generated from.
The trouble.
Right?
What do you mean? What you generated
well,
from?
I mean, you might choose to only render certain body parts. That's what I'm saying.
Well, I mean, I'm
potentially.
thinking.
That's that lazy way of sanitizing by just saying that certain things you're not going
I
to.
mean, if you only
You have to
rendered,
revert to text.
yes, if you only rendered text body parts, then you could obviously make sure the HTML you generated from them was safe. But if you're taking arbitrary HTML, the trouble with I don't actually think we can do sanitization, particularly because the trouble with sanitization is you need to know the context it's going to be inserted into in order to be able to sanitize it.
Well, security considerations are going to be fun no matter what here.
So just as well, it's probably a separate spec then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right.
Another nice side effect of this is you can actually let the server handle things that the client doesn't understand, the body part types. Like, for example, I can do DSN report renderer.
Yes, that's a
that
good point.
converts
Yep.
it, DSN machine readable part into nice HTML if I want to, for example.
Okay. All right. So there's quite a few IANA considerations that need to go into the spec, and Chris has very kindly volunteered to deal with these and has already made a good start. I just thought I'd run quickly through what we have. We need to reference the mailbox special use registry, which is being created in Extra, and Barry's proposed draft today, and we think that's going to get through pretty quickly, I think, right? Yeah. So we should have that registry soon, and then it's straightforward enough to reference that. We're going to create a new registry of error types, I think, so there's a single place to reference them. Cool. We need to register $$, $flag, etc. in the current registry of IMAP keywords to reserve them because they mapping to the slash system keywords in IMAP. Need to register a .well-known for JMAP and a serve, which I forgot, but Chris reminded me earlier as well for auto discovery serve. So SRV, yeah. Is there anything else? There's a lot of IANA stuff here. Have I missed something? That's really the capabilities, I think, probably. Yeah, which we already have. Sorry, I missed that off here as well, but that we already have a registry being established for that. No? Okay, cool. So
I might spot something during final phase of AD review, but
sure,
nothing pops into my head at the moment.
So I'm hoping this is really fairly mechanical. There's nothing, to decide here or anything, and Chris can hammer that out. So overall status, both core and mail are basically complete. We've had a look. There was a few minor issues which we've just talked about, and I think we have resolutions for. But there are, other than those IANA things, there's almost no GitHub issues open. We still need some more examples, I think, in the spec, and obviously the IANA considerations to be done. But I think it's pretty much semantically done. Chris, you got a comment?
Yeah, we also need work on the security considerations. I just did a pull request for the submission security considerations, which Ron's post earlier today reminded me I needed to write that. So that was
sure.
Good.
So I think
we need more security considerations about content sanitization and whatnot.
Yep, good point. So I think, and that kind of feeds into this. This is a really good time to review and comments whether security considerations that need to be included, typographic, like just typos or type errors in the type declarations, or obviously even any bigger issues that we haven't spotted. Hopefully there aren't too many bigger issues. But yeah, I think we'd like to get this to last call pretty soon. Might not actually publish before IETF102, but at least get it to last call and basically done. So yeah, now is a good time to review it. So now we have kind of the core and mail specs. People are starting to talk about extensions. Obviously the HTML body thing we talked about looks like it might be extension. And Lexi, you are looking at an SMIME extension. Would you like to say anything about that?
So SMIME extension is at the moment very simple. It only deals with verifying SMIME signatures because it It doesn't require any user-specific state. You just need to have trust anchors on the server, which is, hopefully straightforward. Just a single property that returns verification status of signature and whether it was successful or not. It has some structure. It's a little bit extensible. There is actually a way of, if you have access to the user's private key through the account, then you can also do decryption, and I didn't include it in the document, but can be added. The other side of this is we can possibly extend this for submission to do signing and or encryption as well. Again, requires cooperating server that you can access to the private key somewhere. I think the small thing I've done is sort of useful by itself, but probably people want to do the bigger things about signing and encrypting and or decrypting. So, but
Okay. So what are your next steps with that?
Didn't I post it as a JMAP name, and chair said, we need to have working group consensus on this?
Yes,
and you were right.
Um,
So can you did you get what you want, or do you want to follow up?
I think we can do a quick call to this room. Any objections to accepting the extension? That sounds like
Okay.
Barry has offered to write a competing extension.
Any objections in the Jabber room? I see none so far.
No.
Let's assume there will be none.
Awesome. Let us.
Okay,
accept this.
so then I
It's
think you
clearly
can
in scope.
Yes,
you can just
charter
accept
says
it, and
talk
it
about
will
this
be published in 00. So
Yeah.
Excellent.
I'm
Will do.
Okay.
Couple of nopes from the Jabber room.
No objection. Yeah. Okay. Other extensions. Bron had an extension to expose some IMAP data in JMAP.
And based on discussion on the list, I have shelved it for now. The time is not ripe for such a thing. We make
Time is
we
not-
make we make
Does
we make
time ripen?
Yes, it totally does. Let me point at IMAP 4 Rev 2 as a fine example of a ripe.
But then IMAP has ripened. IMAP has gotten perhaps overripe.
Yeah. There are other extensions coming through. We don't need it as a demo extension, and it's probably a good example of a vendor extension that we can point at rather than a standard extension.
I mean,
in ideal world, there's somebody other than Fastmail guys can do an extension.
Yeah.
I mean, mine is so simple that it doesn't. Yeah. I mean, if we can have one more, that will be sort of a bit of a proof. Then it's actually okay.
Someone else
but-
is welcome to do the HTML body one. I'm quite happy not to do that.
Chris Newman. One of the so if you read the security considerations I proposed for submission, they reference the de facto X client extension to SMTP because there's a bunch of security considerations that's what you need to deal with them. The question is, do we want to try to pick up and standardize X client or something like it? Because to glue a JMAP submission to a submission server, you need something like X client. And if you don't glue a JMAP submission to a submission server, then you probably want to implement Milter in your JMAP server, which tells you why you want to glue your JMAP server to a submission server.
Okay, so the AD.
So is there documentation for X client somewhere? In some text form?
X client is so Postfix implements it and has a web page documenting it.
Can you give a quick overview of what X client is? Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so antivirus, anti-spam, and all the anti-abuse technologies like to have as much data about the client as possible to do rate limits and whatnot.
Yep.
So what XClient does is it forwards things like IP addresses, whether you use SSL. It can forward. It can even forward SASL identities, things like that. So it's basically, trying to give all the context, all the context that the front end knows that the submission server doesn't know, that you use to do rate limiting and security evaluations.
This doesn't seem to be anything that would change in the protocol level. It's the implementation on the server that would pass that implementation. It has the IP address that's connecting to it for JMAP and everything.
It's the protocol between the JMAP server and the submission server.
Right. So this is an implementation node really for the JMAP server, as opposed to the JMAP protocol between.
I'm not saying we have to do this, but if we don't do this, we're kind of in a position of you either have to implement this de facto, or you have to come up with a private arrangement between the JMAP server and the submission server for every submission server you want your JMAP server to support.
I think that's okay. For example, if you were Microsoft Exchange, to pull something out of a hat, you probably aren't using SMTP internally, but you still have a way of getting something from your mail store to your outbound SMTP queue. And they wouldn't be using XClient anyway, probably. It's one of many ways of doing it. And this, as Neil said, a point of effect.
Yeah, this definitely doesn't strike me as something that should be in the current documents, because it does not affect the protocol between the client and the server, which is what we're specifying. I could certainly see it being as part of implementation notes of recommendations for JMAP mail. Otherwise, I think this would have to be a separate.
Well, I've mentioned this in the non-normatively in the security considerations, but I use the phrase "strongly encouraged," which is as close as you can get to. That's the strongest non-normative recommendation you can do.
I think that's fine.
And I think that's fine for now. But the point I'm raising is, do we want to increase the? These are two boxes that might come from different vendors. Do we want to increase the interoperability between them?
All right. So I guess the question now goes back to Alexi. Who should take on this work if we think that someone should?
For the record, Ned volunteers to co-author it.
Okay, that makes it slightly easier. So I assume this can be informational document. Question both to the room and the Jabber room. And so I'm tempted to, documenting things that people use in the real world is a good thing on my book. So assuming it's informational document, it's...
Ned says SMTP extensions have to be standards track.
This isn't an extension, is it?
XClient is an SMTP extension.
Do they have to? Can be. Well, okay, it's not really experimental, but...
I will check.
Okay. Because my initial reaction was send it to independent stream. But
so is this to standardize XClient as an SMTP extension?
Yes.
I sorry.
Jason Pollis has said to the mic, is there an open API /Swagger for this? Does anybody here understand what that question means?
No. Can you repeat this?
Is there an open API /Swagger for this?
Well, basically API that automatically translated by the...
So a Swagger or Open API specification is a JSON related to a JSON schema representation of the protocol. It's very much related to REST protocols. So it's a machine description of the protocol.
So it's RPC call.
Jason Polis says, is there an open API /Swagger for this?
Yeah.
What I just...
in terms of other technologies in this space that solve the similar problem, there's a de facto protocol called the Proxy Protocol version 2.0 but it solves it at a connection level. So it actually sends a binary chunk at the front of the connection that passes this info. And since SMTP, you might want to leave the connection open and reuse it. It makes sense to have one in-band of the SMTP session. But yeah, SMTP isn't a JSON protocol, so no, I'm not aware of any extension to send JSON, to use JSON verbs to control an SMTP server.
And
And I'm not sure that would be a good idea.
yes, and to answer the other question, you actually can do experimental, but it has to be an IESG approved experimental to do a SMTP extension. It says each service extension registered with IANA must be defined in a formal standards track or IESG approved experimental protocol document. So you can't use the independent stream.
Okay. My understanding of our charter is that this is out of scope.
This is absolutely out of scope, yes. So it has to be AD sponsored then,
So,
which depending on who the editors are, I'm probably willing to entertain, yes.
Right. And it still can be experimental, but it has to go through the IETF stream. So
Well, if it's not experiment, then
then
but
standards
yeah, okay.
track, fine.
God.
This has been implemented in various places, though, Chris. So it's
Postfix implements it, we implement it.
that's okay.
Well, experimental is lying about what it is.
yeah. So
Making it standard track might be difficult though, just because of, I don't know.
Why?
Well, depending how much of a hack people think it is, I don't know.
I guess the question is,
Only way to
this
find
in-
out.
is this in scope for extra?
No,
Yeah, no.
I was trying to get SMTP bits into extra charter and private negotiations.
Yeah, I think the charter explicitly says that
SMTP is out of
SMTP
scope,
work is
so
in scope.
no submission work either. So
I mean, the
No.
particular thing that's out of scope that people were trying to get in is making SMTP internet standard, and that's just a rat hole. So
Okay.
Okay, so
it's kind of an irony of our system that RFC 821 and 822 are internet standard but obsolete. RFC 5321 and 5322 are proposed standard and the current versions. But
And submission, RFC 6409 is full standard.
so
that sounds like
It's
a
a-
story for a pub at some
just a
point.
funny way the way our process works.
Okay.
Excellent. All right, we have a conclusion here. Alexi is going to AD sponsor it, and he's really
Think about
excited.
Actually, I missed.
well, okay. Conditional of me actually reading the draft first, and yeah.
Yep.
I think yeah. So Ned volunteered. Somebody else volunteered to help him.
He said author or co-author, so I guess he would
Okay.
he would be willing to do it himself. I always like to have a backup for when someone goes dark. So
We should ask Victor.
We're using it.
Victor Duchovny,
Yes, because he works on postfix quite
Okay.
a bit. So
That's-
that
I'm-
might be a good
yeah,
idea.
I'm sure he'd be willing to do it.
Unless he hates it and it's not DNS
Well,
sec
there is
or
that.
Dane
There
or
is that. Anyway, Ned says either way works for him. So
And are there any other extensions or other new drafts that people want to talk about? I don't know of any more. I don't think myself. Okay.
I've already been burned.
Yep. And here I had some slides of that. We already done. We talked about that.
Test suite, I don't have too much to say about that yet. It's not really at a point where it's ready to show to the world, but we have the framework and we're starting to use it for testing on our server implementation. I'm hoping to bring it to the hackathon in Montreal because we'll be close to the team that's actually working on it in the US. So people from there will come up and we will have a JMAP test suite that can be used against at least the servers that we know about. We'll be testing
So
against
yes,
them.
anyone else developing JMAP server might like to bring it along to Montreal, and hopefully we can try hooking this test suite up and see what happens.
It's
So
written
the
in code.
hackathon at Montreal will be a massive interoperability test. Yes.
That's the plan.
All righty. We'll hold you to it.
Cool. In that case, is there any other business? Now, I had thought of something, and I can't remember what it was.
We could get a whole hour back.
Maybe. I don't remember. Sorry. Well, let's flip back through the slides and see. We're talking about IANA. No, we're way back then. This stuff's all there.
Go through GitHub.
Well, I've made it disappear. Yes, we could absolutely go through GitHub.
Oh, that's right.
Sorry.
The other thing that we oh dear, God, you opened Firefox.
That's the one I use.
Yeah, all
What's
right.
kind of
Is so we have one other document that we actually need, which is the recommendations on. It's an informational document for implementing JMAP in coexistence with IMAP, either as a proxy or on the same server, which Alexei, I believe, has volunteered to author. And I just wanted to remind everyone that that was the case.
Alexi's very excited about this.
I am.
I did agree to contribute some text to this.
Chris Newman is also going to. Right, good.
I'm excited. It's just, can I buy more time?
Yeah.
This sort of situation. Well, I think considering that the base specs are nearly ready, I think delaying it much further. So I will have something before Montreal.
Great. Yeah, I'm hoping to get the stuff we've discussed and those remaining things on there all kind of finished up in the next week or two, so that we basically then it's there for people to review until.
Right. I will make a very drafted draft outlining the categories of things that I think would be nice to talk about, and then we can fill in gaps. And
right, I'm sure. Yeah, we can contribute. Robert, who's implemented it in Cyrus for us, and other people on our team.
All our Roberts could probably.
All our Roberts, yes, have done various IMAP implementations of. JMAP implementations with IMAP, so might have some things to say. Okay, great. That's all I have. And if
so just glancing at the list here, make his primary per type is on there.
I think it's probably the only thing on here that we haven't really discussed. But it's pretty trivial, and I think I'm just going to do it. It's just at the moment you can designate one primary account, but if you have multiple bits of data that you can access, you might want a different account to be primary for a different bit of data. The example for this, well, in FastMail, our file storage is a separate account to the mail contacts calendars because of the semantics of accounts. You need to copy blobs across. You can't just reference them and stuff. So they're separate accounts, but you still need to say which of those is your primary files account as opposed to your primary mail account. There's nothing conflicting about that, so I don't see any issue in making is primary per type. The only issue, I guess, is what syntax to use, but again, it's bike shedding. I don't think it's that important, so I'll just pick something. I think everything else on there we have discussed. So
yeah, it's mostly registries.
Yeah, so
security considerations.
So I don't think any of this is difficult. I'm hoping it all gets kind of dealt with the next few weeks, and then there's both specs. So there's waiting review. And more examples needed as well. And
cool.
Okay.
All right. Does anybody have anything else? I don't think so. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy your hour off.
Or enjoy going to MLS or something.
Yeah. Cool.
Right, thank you.
I'll warn you, MLS is crowded.
I'm sure it is. Secure group communications. Abstract secure. Well, it's a security and
Messaging layer security. It's one of the BOFs. And then we got another BOF next session if you want ILA, Identifier Locator.
No, go to UTA.
Yeah, we're going to UTA.
Or UTA. I'm going to skip them both. I'm going to take a break.
Lightweight.
Yeah.
Not
Thanks,
the
Barry.
fighting spirit, is it?
I am. I should double check. You're going to Thailand, aren't you?
Yes.
Excellent. I will not be in Thailand.
Which will you be in? That you will be in Montreal.
I will be in Montreal.
Okay.